For 200 years, the UK's rail network has moved passengers from place to place. Tens of thousands of men, women and children have boarded trains every single day since those earliest journeys. For the vast majority, the journey ends without incident, but for an unlucky few, something goes wrong and the railway adds another disaster to the record books. We tell the stories of those darkest days and the people caught up in them. Welcome to Signals to Danger.
3 people have died after a passenger train derailed near Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire this morning and caught fire.
We went through a massive fireball. I could feel the heat coming through the windows, and all the windows I could see were just orange.
36 people were killed and more than 100 injured in this morning's train crash at Clapham Junction in South London. 2 commuter trains carrying more than 1,300 passengers collided shortly after 8 o'clock. A third train ran into the wreckage.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to the Rail Safety Review for the 14th of July 2025. My name is Dan and I'm the producer of the Signals to Danger podcast. Rail Safety Reviews, as you'll probably know by now, are the episodes of the podcast where we talk about the rail industry as it's happening right now, drawing on the news released by the Rail Accident Investigation Branch as well as other industry sources. Before we get going on this episode, though, I'm going to warn you that you might find today a little bit short-formed, or perhaps you could consider it a partial cancellation. Whichever of the metaphors you choose, it is my strange little way of telling you this is going to be a slightly shorter episode, as I have, I'm struggling with a bit of strep throat, and I'm currently halfway through a course of antibiotics to try and see that off. Now, while the razor-sharp sore throat has eased off, I'm really not angling for a record-breaking episode, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I couldn't bring myself to let you all down. I'm really happy with how the podcast's been ticking over for the last few weeks, and I didn't want to put a pause on that. Also, I'm kind of hoping that my post-production skills have got to the point now where I'm going to get away with you not actually realising that I sound like I've just been chewing gravel, or, ballast, for the last week or so. Right, what do we have in store for us this week? We're going to start off with a bit of news, talking about a few things, particularly looking at where the West Coast Main Line has been for the last few weeks. We've had a derailment, a buffer stop collision, some wonky wires, and some fairly unreliable freight trains to have a quick chat about all on that one corridor. Then we're going to have a little chat about the rebranding of a super significant rail media outlet, which has taken place this week. Well, not super significant, but it's me having a little chat about the decisions I've made to rebrand the podcast. With quite a bit to get through, and only so much voice to do it with, I guess it's time for us to get, cracking. Let's get started then with a look at the numerous issues which have befallen the West Coast Main Line in recent weeks. We'll start with the fairly disruptive derailment of a London North Western Railway's Class 350 at Denby Hall South Junction on the 26th of June. This is near to Bletchley in Buckinghamshire if you, like I, didn't know it from the junction name alone. And according to the RAIB, what's happened there then, the train had earlier encountered a technical problem while forming a southbound passenger service, meaning it was unable to depart southwards from the platform at Bletchley. So the train was failed and the passenger service was cancelled. Now the train still sat there, so it needs to be moved out of the way. It was operational, despite the failure, if it was driven northwards from the opposite end. So that allowed it to be moved from the platform and meant the rest of the train could be moved out of the way and out of the way of the rest of the trains that were trying to use that congested southern end of the West Coast Main Line. This desire to get the train shifted was slightly affected by the fact that a failed on-track machine had been stabled earlier that day on the only signalled route from the north end of Platform 4, so the staff at Rugby Rail Operating Centre decided to allow the train to travel in the wrong direction on the up line, which is the southbound slow line. Now, there's a bit of railway slang that I've used every now and then. I'm not sure if I used it on the podcast, but I do use it in day-to-day life, and that's bang road. And bang road is jargon for a wrong direction move. So basically travelling on the up line in the down direction or travelling on the down line in the up direction. A bang road move. Basically, if you get it wrong, you go bang. I'm assuming that's not the reason, but that's always the way I've thought of it. Now, looking at that plan to get that unit moved, there's a keyword in there that I'll imagine will form part of the investigation into this one. No signalled routes available. So without signalled routes, the driver would need to be instructed on what to do by the signaller, but once they'd started doing this, there would be no guidance from signals for the extent of that move. The wrong direction movement, which was planned, required the signaller to instruct the driver to pass the north end platform signal at danger, then travel to Denby Hall South Junction without the protection normally afforded by signalling interlocking. The intention, well, that was that the train would cross onto the down slow line at the junction, and at that point it would be returned to normal signal control for its onward journey northwards to Kings Heath Depot near Northampton. All of which sounds like a really good plan, well thought out and executed, until you realise that the train then derailed on a switch diamond just shortly after leaving the station, travelling at around about 15 miles an hour. Needless to say, a unit sat down in the ballast on one of the country's busiest railway lines caused some significant disruption, and it was a couple of days till this was resolved, literally about 3 days until everything was out the way and good to go again. Considering it's one of the UK's probably busiest two arterial routes on railway, it's not a great thing to have a chunk of it out of play for that length of time. It is going to be a full investigation. And one of the things that they're going to be looking at is how this sort of out-of-course moves, or unusual, out-of-course is another phrase that we do use quite frequently, how these unusual moves are validated. Is that the only thing that's gone wrong on the West Coast Main Line in the last few weeks then? Nope, it really hasn't been. There was another operational incident which took place that we're aware of, this time right at the southern end of the line at London Euston. A 9-car Pendolino operated by Avanti West Coast was arriving into Platform 1 following a journey from Edinburgh when it collided with the buffers at the end of the platform at low speed. Now, no injuries have been reported as far as I'm aware, but there have been some damages caused, some fairly minor looking damages to be fair to the front end of the unit. The couple of doors themselves will probably need replacing. There seems to be some cracks in headlights and some other minor bodywork, but what we don't know, and what I've not seen anything from, is how extensive any damage might be to kit behind the coupling doors. Now, couplers themselves and their fitments are designed to absorb a considerable amount of impact, let's be fair. Every coupling move is a very controlled crash, but we won't know unless this does go down the full investigation route and facts are made available as to how much damage has been caused. If it's not something that needs to go that far, it'll probably all be very internal to Avanti, and rightfully none of us will find out the details. The buffer can be seen to have done its job very well. The idea with these big fixed buffers is that actually they would move when something impacts them, and you can see looking at the pictures of this instant that the buffer that's been impacted has moved back around about a metre or so at least, absorbing the impact of the train crashing into it. So they work, they've done their job. There hasn't been an awful lot of actual media chat about this one. Only things I've really found on this are from the railway forums, and as information filled as they are, there's also quite an element of speculation on those platforms. So I can't say for definite with any certainty what's happened in that instant other than it has taken place. Now, I'm not going to draw on the speculation. I think if you've been around long enough to follow the podcast, you know that's not what I do. There are a selection of causes that people have suggested this could be attributed to, but as none of them have been formally spoken to as yet, we'll leave it up in the air. On the question of whether this will form part of an RAIB investigation or a safety digest, like I said, at this point, not quite sure. I have seen opinions in both directions, but we haven't seen anything formally from the branch. The basic version of what does entail a full investigation is any incident which results in the death of at least one person, serious injury to 5 or more people, or extensive damage to rolling stock, the infrastructure, or the environment. Now, clearly, the first two don't apply in this situation. And quite frankly, looking at the damage that has been caused from the photographs that we've seen, I don't think this would meet that test of significant, well, extensive is the word that's used. Don't think extensive damage has been caused, but the branch also has to also may investigate any incident which could have had these impacts in slightly different circumstances. So if you change one or two things, one of these other impacts may have occurred. And even if that's not the case, they can still investigate incidents which could have wider implications for railway safety. So the only way to get the answer for sure is to wait and see. Moving on from operational incidents then, what else has been stirring up trouble on the West Coast, particularly towards the north end of the route? It's 3 words: disruption, disruption, disruption. It has not been the best 2 or 3 weeks for performance up north, and passengers have felt the brunt of the issues. On the 30th of June, we saw a tree come down in the Beatock area, which is a bit of a pain in the bum anywhere, but in an electrified area, it can have a real extra effect if it brings down the overhead wires, which it did in this case. And although this incident took place in the first few hours of the day and repair work had been started by around 4 a.m, it took until around 8 p.m. for this work to actually be done. Such a long period of time clearly had a monumental impact on passenger and freight services, meaning the only other options were trains as close as possible to the blocked section, and then either use road transport to bridge the gap, or travel all the way across the country to access services on the East Coast Main Line instead. Now, while this is a reasonable option from some points to other points, now a fatality north of York on the same day impacted the East Coast Main Line for a few hours, meaning that options were just increasingly limited. So that's kind of a day which was just a write-off for travelling on the West Coast Main Line. In isolation, this would be a very bad day up there, but it's not the only thing that's been going on of late. There was also, more tragically, a fairly nasty fatality at Carnforth over the last few weeks as well, which shut the line down for a time. And on top of that, there's been a spate of failed freight trains heading over the top. Now, spate would be probably quite fair. Several have happened in the last few weeks, and each time it has a significant impact on other trains trying to negotiate their way along what is predominantly a double track section of railway on the northern part of the West Coast Main Line. I am losing track on which side of the country I'm on. Now, there have been a number of times when those freights have sat down for a few hours, and either due to loco faults, separated wagons, or other issues, but each time the line has been blocked in at least one direction, with at times blocks need to be taken on both sides so people can go and examine trains. Passenger trains and other freights have just been stacked up behind the failed one or cancelled outright. At points, the East Coast Main Line is a little bit better set up for this sort of interruption on its northern double track sections, because there are areas where bidirectional signalling in a fashion is installed. It's not proper bidirectional signalling like equitable on both lines, but it's a simplified version known as SIMBIDS, or simplified bidirectional signalling. That allows for single line working to take place without using things like pilot men, but it just isn't in place on the areas of the West Coast, which would have benefited from it of late. SIMBIDS isn't a perfect system, but it's one that could have probably shown some real benefits at times if it had been applied on both sides of the country. Safe to say, the last month or so has been rough up there, and the performance figures of the major operators on the route will have taken something of a knock. Now, hopefully the coming weeks will see a reduction in issues, with all involved parties likely looking for solutions to make improvements. And while there are some things the industry can't affect, surely we should be looking to make positive changes where our influence can be brought to bear. Righto. That is the West Coast chaos covered off, which is a catchy tagline, but we're not really the podcast for catchy taglines. Time for a very brief interlude. moving away from the drama of the West Coast Main Line now to talk a little podcast news. It's nice I can sort of wax lyrical on this one a little bit more than actually just writing myself a script based on what I found on various sources of information. Because this is me talking about me and my podcast, I guess. If you have been following the podcast on social media, or even if you've looked at the artwork that's showing up on the episodes that you've downloaded, you'll probably have noticed a little change. The aesthetics of Signals to Danger has seen something of a relaunch over the last week. I kind of feel like I owe you a little bit of background as to why I've done this. I've had one design for quite a long time, really, but let's go from the beginning. Back in 2020, I started the podcast, and I needed to have a little bit of a think about branding. If I was going to upload this onto websites where people could download the podcast, I definitely needed a name, and I toyed with a few, but Signals to Danger is the one that I came with. Perfectly happy with that. Absolutely no need, desire, or even ever thought about changing that one. That works for what this podcast is. So I figured I'd then need some artwork to go with the podcast when people downloaded it. And if I was going to have artwork, I should probably have a logo on it. I didn't have a clue where to start at that point. I eventually came up with the idea of just writing out the name of the podcast in a font reminiscent of, if not exactly, Gill Sans, a classic railway font in the pre-rail alphabet era. Nothing fancy, but inherently, to look at it, very railway. Put it white font on black. I even played with embossing and things like that, but in the end, I kept it flat. Made out to look like an old signal box sign with the white border and the 4 white screws in bunny ears. It worked quite nicely. I thought it needed something a little bit extra, so I took the widely known double arrow symbol, spun it 90 degrees, and used it as the N in both Signals and Danger, and I really liked it. Yes, I stuck with it, and it's been the logo of the podcast for 5 years. Now, as much as I've always enjoyed that, I've always thought it's worked, it'll always have a special place in my heart, there were issues with it. The white, black and red colour scheme carried through to the website, to episode art and social media content, but that is kind of where some of those issues did come in. Over all of that time, say the last 5 years, I've never really settled with the episode art. That sort of album cover thing that comes up when you are listening to the podcast on Spotify or Apple, and that's changed incredibly frequently, sometimes dressed up as a seasons thing, or sometimes just because I've changed it. But if you were to flick back through Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, whatever you're using to listen, you'll see at least 5, I think, iterations of what the artwork of Signals to Danger looks like. It starts out as a red overlay over a picture of the accident. For a while, I tried to do the episode title looking like the branding at the time. So, for example, the Hatfield one is in a very GNAR-esque logo font. All the old Big 4 BR type era ones were like the old station totems. The Potter's Bar one is very much in a Network Southeastern appearance. Now, I tried to do that, but I mean, I myself am literally just scrolling through Spotify to look at the various different types of logo design I've had over the years. And back in the era when I was doing College Junction, Clayton Tunnel, Glanrid, that was the episode name in a red box overlaid on the same black background with black and red highlights over it. There was the Carmont era. That changed when I started doing Eccles, Hickson, Singleton Bank. It changed again. I've never really settled, I guess, on how I want the podcast as a brand to look. Now, social media banners, they've all been quite disjointed as well. And I've got to the point where I don't want it to be disjointed anymore. And instead of trying to fold everything back into the same, I've clearly gone through several iterations of trying to work out what I want that to look like. So I thought maybe now is the time to try and start again. I mean, I've always tried to link back the episode art and things like that to this colour scheme, look and feel of what the logo has originally set out, but I've never quite managed to nail it on, and it's always been a point of frustration to me. And then I look back at all the different social media platforms that I'm on, and I kind of feel like none of these match up, and some of them are very dated. And you can tell I did them 3-4 years ago. Now, I decided, like I said, to go back and start from scratch, almost, with it. I mean, the podcast name is staying the same. That's never going to change. I like that. But even looking back at that logo, which I've been very proud of for the last 5 years, it's not perfect. It's not, what's the word that you might use? It's not versatile. It's very short, but very, very wide. And actually, organically, it doesn't fit in many places. As much as I wish it did, I've tried to adapt it. I've tried to break it up over 2 lines, but it never really felt right doing that. The length of the words don't particularly lend themselves to being stacked up one on top of the other, because signals and danger are very, very similar in length, and you can't break 2 into more than 2. It is 2 letters. So it needed to be changed. And actually, to be honest with you, one of the other factors in there is that it's actually a different font from the one that I've used for a few years now for the rest of the podcast. And I never went back and changed the logo because, well, I did try the logo in the same font and it didn't work because it is this quintessentially railway type font. And Barn Shrift, which is a great font and I've got a lot of time for it, clearly, it isn't Gill Sans. It doesn't look the same. So, like I said, probably in the last couple of weeks, I've made a decision that it was time for a change. And I've gone off script for the last sort of 5 minutes or so. So if it got a bit disjointed and waffly, I do apologise. Normally I like to read things I've written down. But I'm back on the script now, so hopefully it'll be more sense made. I said to myself, if I was going to make the podcast as a brand new project today with all of the tinkering experience in using Creative Cloud and things like that I've got, how would I do it? How would I create the branding behind it? And that's where I found myself this time 2 weeks ago, staring at a blank page in Illustrator, trying to figure something out. And eventually a logo came out of the pixels. A new, clean, easy to read one, hopefully. And it is everywhere now. So hopefully you've seen it. It's on all of the social media platforms. The episode art that's coming out now has the new logo on it. The new brand sticks broadly to the colour palette. But I've actually defined what red I'm using, which, funnily enough, I never did in the past. I've defined exactly what colour of red I'm using for the podcast now. So hopefully it will be, like I said, cleaner, easier to read, should translate better at smaller sizes, and also I'll be able to use the proper logo in more situations, as it's only more or less twice as wide as it is tall. It's a short rectangle as opposed to a long one. Also, in a very hypothetical sense, I was abundantly aware, and have been for the last 5 years, that one of the elements of the old logo might be very firmly inspired by an icon which is potentially owned by somebody else. Now, I'd like to think that it was altered and used in a way that wouldn't be an issue, but in this day and age, and with me always wanting to get more people listening, I was kind of aware that might be something that needed to go away at some point, and now seemed like a reasonable time to do that. And I won't talk any more on that because I'm sure you'll have figured it out by what I've said, but it was time, I think, for that to change. So alongside the new logo, the episode art, social media banners, and all other content have now found themselves updated. The only thing that remains to be done is looking at the website, but I'm not going to say podcasting is my forte, but web design certainly isn't. Even with all the tools I've used to create the existing page, it's probably a bigger job to get that one right. And it's not one that I'm going to get tied up with to the detriment of publishing episodes for you guys. It will be changing in line with the rest of the branding. It'll just have to be when I've got a little bit more free time to do it. I know some people might not like the new branding, but for me personally, I do. If I didn't think it was worthy of the podcast, I wouldn't have put it out there. This is very much, it's my hobby, but it's my passion as well. And I really want it to be, I want to do it properly. And I hope that the new branding is properly. Now, I'm perfectly happy to hear feedback. I love the community that's built up around Signals. I love the people that I speak to on social media. I've got people I speak to quite regularly over Facebook Messenger or on Twitter that I've never met. And I've never met professionally or personally. I've never had to, but I really enjoy chatting with them. And the only reason that I get to have that luxury is because of Signals to Danger. So I really do value people's opinion. If you want to drop me a DM, send me an email and say, "Oi, mate, your new branding's awful. I really like the old one. Bring it back." By all means, let me know. I mean, if you want to say something positive about it, I'm certainly going to accept that as well. I'm not going to turn away the good feedback. But I want to hear from you. It's other people's opinions that count as well. The only thing I would say is if people do have their reservations about the rebrand, it is literally just the artwork. The content's going to remain the same. The release schedule will keep ticking over. It isn't the forebearer of an unexpected pivot to me covering haberdashery or the world's greatest greyhounds. Signals is still Signals and always will be. Anyway, that is a very, very brief run-through, waffly run-through of why I've tweaked the branding of the podcast, although tweaked is a little bit of an understatement. The other change I've made recently is I'm starting to do a little bit more video content. It's just quick, short videos for now, letting people know the basics of the stories we're telling on each episode, but maybe I'll start doing a little more of them. It's going to be on X, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. To be fair, X is a little tricky sometimes to get the videos on, thanks Elon, but I will try my best nonetheless. They're all additional things though, and the core product is always going to remain the podcast. I just didn't see the harm in expanding some of the extra little bits on the side. So I think that is about all that my throat has time for this week. Battled through just for you guys. The last thing I want to very, very briefly add is if any of you are going to find yourself at the Greatest Gathering at the end of the month at Derby's Lichfield Lane Works, I am planning on being there on all 3 days. So if you fancy saying hello or hurling that feedback at me in person, I'd be more than happy to meet some people and say hello. Drop me a DM on any of my social media platforms and we'll set something up. Thank you to all of you for showing up as you always do. And of course, a big extra thanks to those Patreon supporters who keep the show going. Details on how to add your own support can be found on signalstodanger.com, as well as a link to merchandise, which for now is very much still in the old branding. Get it while it's left if you want it, as I'm not sure if it'll be around forever. Until the next time I speak to you, travel safe.